Our patient is 44 years old, female patient. She developed attacks of tachycardia and palpitation since 3 years, associated with chest pain and numbness all over her shoulders and left arm. She had 5 times attack, 5 times of palpitation during the last 3 years. She admitted to the hospital twice. First admission was terminated by IV medication. The last attack was at 230 beat per minute and terminated by physiological maneuver. There is no documentation, ECG documentation for both attacks at the hospital. Today's blood pressure is 140/80 and heart rate is 67. She performed an echocardiography that showed a normal echo Doppler study. You can see the 3 venous puncture in the right femoral vein, the 3 wires in the femoral vein, in the IVC. We can appreciate the entry of the decapular catheter via the right femoral vein puncture and via IVC to the coronary sinus. Here the CS catheter in the coronary sinus, and we can see the recording on the decapular catheter, a sharp A and far field V. Here the decapular catheter that navigated in the right atrium and right ventricle and also his region. We can see the pacing induced tachycardia with shortest VE time at CS34, denoting an eccentric activation and an accessory pathway, a retrograde A wave utilizing an accessory pathway, a left-sided accessory pathway. We can see here the preparation for the transseptal puncture via long wire and SL0 long cheese, Mullen cheese. We can see the wire. We try to get the wire into the left subclavian. Then we, guided by the wire, we inserted the long cheese. Here we try to navigate the wire to be in the left subclavian vein. Some trials that the wire get from right subclavian vein into the left subclavian vein. As we can see, we are pushing the long cheese. Then we will withdraw the wire and start to insert our transseptal needle via the long cheese. Then we adjust the transseptal needle. We can see here the needle is inserted. We was adjusting the curve so that it can hinge over the fossa ovalis of the interatrial septum. The needle and the long cheese post are directed clockwise at 5 p.m. Then we withdraw both. We can see now the needle at the tip of the dilator of the long cheese. We are now try to on the REO view to withdraw pause at 5 p.m. Tilt of the cheese. Now we can see a little bit the quadripolar catheter marking the His region and the root of the aorta, and we now adjusting a more posterior position of the transseptal needle. Here the LAO view. Then we get back into the RA view to see how posterior or anterior we are. This is a much better posterior position of the transeptal needle. We can see the injection of the dye, and marking this the septum. Then we achieve the transeptal puncture, and we try now to withdraw the oxygenated blood from the left atrium and inserting the long wire via the dilator of the long sheath into one, to be parked in the one of the pulmonary vein, so that we can guide the dilator and the long sheath to bypass the puncture of the interatrial septum completely into the left atrium, so that we can get the catheter into the left atrium. And now see the long wire in the pulmonary vein. Then we withdraw the withdrawal of the dilator and the long wire with the long sheath ready to receive the non-irrigated catheter to start mapping the mitral annulus. Here we can see the flushing of the long sheath with a precaution of absence of any air bubble in the IV line. We can see here the sinus rhythm and a BVC from the head. Then we can see ventricular pacing from the RV, and the ablation catheter, the irrigated tip ablation catheter, start to map the mitral annulus from the left posterior region up to the anterolateral region. We can see now the sinus rhythm. Here the RAO view to get the signal, the AV signal on the ablation catheter. This is the best view to engage the catheter with the annulus, then start mapping on the left anterior oblique view. Here the catheter at almost posterolateral region. In the LAO view, we can see A and V signal on the catheter. Here in the posterior region, the catheter in the posterior region. Then the left posterior region. We can see A, sharp A and V signal on the ablation catheter. Here we started to get or adjust the catheter more in the right anterior oblique. Here we can see the ventricular pacing from the RV. We can see here the ventricular pacing from the right ventricle with the eccentric activation with the shortest VA time on the ablation catheter, preceding all the A signal on the CS catheter. We got this signal at almost the left posterior to left posterolateral region. We can see here RV pacing starting with eccentric activation via the AV node. Then after that the activation was eccentric via or utilizing the accessory pathway. We got the best VA time on the ablation catheter using ventricular pacing. We are adjusting the catheter and mapping the mitral annulus to get the best VA signal on the distal ablation. We can appreciate here a very good fractionated A wave on the distal ablation catheter. We started to deliver the radio frequency ablation here, as we can see. Further adjustment of the ablation catheter in the posterolateral region. Ablation was done again. As we can see now, the retrograde conduction during ventricular pacing was via AV node. There was no further conduction via accessory pathway. Here the retrograde Wenckebach cycle length. Ventricular pacing, showing retrograde via AV nodes. Pacing from the left ventricle using the ablation catheter. We are now trying to capture LV during pacing from the ablation catheter with the retrograde via AV node and the earliest A on the HIS catheter, and typical concentric conduction at the CS catheter, earliest A on CS 910 and the latest at CS 12. We can see the opposite maneuver emphasizing the absence of any further accessory pathway conduction. All the retrograde conduction is via AV node. Then we can see the Wenckebach cycle length without any conduction via a bystander accessory pathway. Here is CS burst pacing, intra-burst pacing, and achieving antegrade Wenckebach cycle length.
ايه ده نازل لك
Here we can appreciate a PVC from the ablation catheter I was showing a very interesting case of concealed left posterolateral accessory pathway. We showed and discussed all the maneuvers we done to achieve successful ablation of this left side concealed accessory pathway. It was a very successful case with no recurrence of any further tachycardia. Thank you so much.